Hi everyone, it's great to be here. My name is Camilo. I have been a technology enthusiast for as long as I can remember. And just like many of you, I grew up playing with computers, exploring darkest corners of internet without getting in trouble, I hope. And that led me into a career in the thrilling malware research. And today, we want to look into tooth tombs.
Yes, that's true, but please hold on your archaeologist hats because we're not here to unravel Egyptian mysteries. No, this is actually about the universe of threats in Latin America. I'm Fernando, malware researcher for ESET since September of 2020, and yeah, let's start.
Okay, in the year 2012, as I embarked with my journey with ESET, the threat landscape in Latin America was very different than what it's today. At that time, the predominant threats was globally reaching botnets like Dorbot. In fact, during that year, from ESET present our research related with Dorbot operation in this conference. However, as the year passed, we witnessed a shift in the threat landscape in the line with trends present in the 2014 virus bulletin conference. That year's conference highlights the growing influence of macro malware as a vector for the spread of cyber threats. Consequently, Latin America began experience a shift towards more localized malicious campaigns. These campaigns adopted macro malware strategies to distribute threats such as Dorbot and other botnets, predominant botnets. But simultaneously, our telemetry data at ESET began to reveal the emergence of unusual, uncommon piece of malicious code. Notably, we start to observe instance of malware created using Python and Autoit, equipped with remote access Trojan functionalities. These mark a departure from the norm and indicate a shift in the threat actors toolset. We were witness to a pivotal moment in the threat landscape of Latin America. We start to see threat campaigns with a new perspective. Malicious campaigns with uncommon characteristics and target users only within the region. One of the most notable examples of this shift was the emergence of the infamous Machete, but it's important to note that Machete is only one of these campaigns that are reshaping the threat landscape. In the screen, you could see some brief of these campaigns. And right there, that embarking on an historical retrospective, our focus today is to delve into the characteristics for recent campaigns. And for this, we aim to shed light on the current state of threat landscape and provide insights into the ever-evolving strategies of cyber adversaries in Latin America.
Yes. And for that part, what we are going to start talking about is about 3 different operations, and we are going to use them as an overview of the malicious activity in Latin America in the recent years. For each operation, we are going to provide a summary of them and focusing on some key points of it. Now, our first operation is Operation Expalax, which took place in the year 2020, and it was focused mainly in Colombia. Especially, I'm talking about entities related in the government sector of that country, or even companies in the private sector. The initial access used for this operation was spear phishing emails that they contain links to download malware. Now, these malwares were actually droppers, and we have seen the use of 3 different droppers. And the final payload of this operation were commodity malware such as Remcos, Enshirad, or Asinrad. And when I said it previously, I said they were using links to download the malware. The malware were hosted in legitimate services just like OneDrive or Mediafire. Now, digging into the different examples of the spear phishing emails, I'm going to show 2 of them. This is the first one. They were trying to I know they are in Spanish, but it's important to mention two things about these emails. The first of all, they try to impersonate important entities from the country. In this example, they are trying to impersonate the CIMIT, which is a system for paying transit violations in Colombia. Or the second one here is from the DIAN, which is the National Directorate for Taxes and Customs in Colombia. Point two, the subjects used on these emails, they were diverse, but they were referred to important personal events that required an immediate action. Like, for instance, notification about a driving infraction, a notification of an embargo accounts. And like I said previously, these emails in some cases contain links, in some cases contains attached files, that these files contains the link to download the malware. The victim has to download the malware by clicking them. Now, we have found droppers in these links, these malwares used. Which these droppers are? Well, we found three types of dropper. First of all, malicious NCS installer, which basically they have an encrypted RAT and a DLL used to decrypt the RAT. The DLL is invoked using run DLL32. And our second one is the use of Asian Tesla packers, which they were using steganography or other packers like CX packer to encrypt and hide the RAT in the binary, and then when it gets executed, it's going to decrypt it and run it in the same space of the dropper or inject it into another process. Our first type of dropper is the auto-hit droppers, which they were heavily obfuscated and they contain two shellcodes. The first shellcode to decrypt the RAT and the second one to inject into a process. And like I said before, final payloads, commodity malwares like Remco's RAT. Now, let's move on to a second case, which is Operation Red Octopus. Operation Red Octopus started in 2022, especially in the months of June and July. And in this case, the victimology was focused mainly in Ecuador and again, government entities, but also we have found victims related in the healthcare system sector. Like in Xpalax, they are using spear phishing emails with them, they have links on these emails to download different modules. And again, we can see the abuse of legitimate services like Google Drive or Discord to hold the malicious payloads. And one of the modules that we found during the Operation Red Octopus was capable of performing an UAC bypass, manipulated the Windows standalone installer if the victim, when it's executing the malware, doesn't have elevated privileges. And another module that we found was capable of modifying Windows APIs, and in the final payload, more commodity malware, Remcos, and some async RAT samples. In this operation, we have an example of the phishing emails, and again, it's in Spanish, victims are in Spanish, but it starts basically what it's saying there is best regards, there is a pending for a legal executive title, and for that you have a lawsuit. And they have a link so you can download some file, and the file was compressed, password protected, and the password was located in the email. Now, when the victim downloads the email, one of the things that we have found here related with the name used for these files, and they were also, again, for example, administrative lawsuit criminal trial, .rar or .zip, a bank transfer proof attached, or criminal process trial, the minefield. So it looks like in Latin America it can be successful if you pressure your victim with fake lawsuits or embargo of banks, stuff related to these things. Now, when the victim downloads, decompresses, and executes this payload, one of the first things it tries to do is check if the admin, the person, has elevated privilege. If not, like I said, it's going to manipulate the Windows standalone installer to execute through it its payload. And what is the payload? Well, basically the payload was a PowerShell script that we can see right there, which the important thing here of this payload is which contains two different URLs. The second one is the one below, it's basically different coded, and they were host in these URLs. You have malware, and they were hosting on Discord in this case. And from these two URLs, the first one contains a DLL developed in .NET, and which basically what it was trying to do is perform a bypass a modification, the AMSI scan buffer API located in AMSI.dll, and also try to bypass the ETW event write function located in NTDLL. The second URL was actually another compressed file, which when you decompress it, it contains rencostrat in there, which is going to be executed on the victim. Now, if I move on to a third case, which is Operation Guinea Pig, this operation happened in the first half of this year, and it has already one difference. Instead of attacking one country, we found victims spread in Latin America, mostly located in Mexico, but we have found also in Peru, also in Colombia, and also in Ecuador. And in this case, again, the use of spear phishing emails, but instead of related impersonated government entities related to the countries, they start to use the well-known parcel delivery company. For their malwares, they hosted the malwares in legitimate service, in this case, engro.io. They abuse of BBS on PowerShell to execute malicious scripts, but in the end is commodity malware. Now, what can we say about the spear phishing email? Well, this one was weird because it already started by saying "Buen día, amigo," which translated to English, it means "good morning, friend." So that's the first thing you get when you read the email. So that company is being very friendly to me, okay? And another thing that is said, complete the correct delivery address and send it back to me ASAP. So, okay, you are being really friendly, at least for me when I was reading it. But what is interesting here is not only the change of the impersonated entity, but also the sophistication in the email is different. I mean, looking at this and compared to the others, this is less sophisticated. In the emails, there was an attached file, compressed, and when the victim downloads the file and executes, was actually a .NET binary, which contains a BBS script heavily obfuscated, and basically that script contains another PowerShell script, which is going to download a DLL, and then that DLL is going to download the final payload agent Tesla, and through the DLL is going to get executed by abusing the process hollowing technique. Now, one last thing interesting about this operation is here we can see the namespace and methods from the .NET DLL. And during the course of the operation, we have found the one on the left, but also during the operation, the one on the right. Basically, it's the same DLL, but in one case, everything was plain text, and the second one was to start to get obfuscations or actually adding benign code to compile the DLL. So it starts to look at, during the operation, they were testing it, testing different evasion techniques and see what works or what doesn't work. Now, so far we have covered these three operations, and these cases study help us to, as an overview, to get a better insight of how cybercriminals work in Latin America. But of course, these are not the only operations and not only the malicious activity that we have found. There is actually an entire universe of threats, which Camilo is going to say a few things about that.
Thanks. These cases are just a sample of how these operations work in Latin America, but they are not the only ones that we have identified. In recent years, we have published about 10 campaigns in the region and have documented dozens more of these kind of campaigns. Despite their apparent diversity, these campaigns share fundamental operational similarities. This suggests the presence of consistent tactics, techniques, and procedures used by the threat actors targeting Latin America. So we decide review them through the lens of the cyber kill chain framework for describe these similarities in their operational methodologies. In our analysis, we have found that most of the bad stuff happening in this region is targeting people who work in companies or government entities. This malicious campaign showed that the people behind know a lot about they are going after. They are not just attack randomly anyone. They have specific information about the context of their targets. The threat actors are spreading more time doing research and learning about their potential victims to make their attacks more effective, or directly are into the region. And what about the tools? The answer couldn't be different: rats. When it comes to the tools used in the malicious operations, we have noticed that they really like using remote access Trojan, but not rats custom-made. They using commodity rats like NG rat, Asin rat, raincoats, like Fer mentioned. And for spread these malware artifacts, they often use free file sharing services like Google Drive or OneDrive, and use other less popular like Mediafire or others. Lately, they are also starting to misuse services like Discord or archive.org for spread these rats. And next, how they try to reach the victims. It's not a surprise that they mostly use the email for trick people. These campaigns are usually focused on different countries in the region, and they pretend to be important government or tax agencies. They use different campaigns in each country, but with similar characteristics in the social engineer that they used. But they are not picky about who they treat within the company, that the company they target, and by doing this, they hope to find weak spots in the company's defenses and maybe steal more secret information. The next step, make mess with the victim. For this, to make their attacks work, these malicious campaigns follow patterns. These campaigns usually have a long propagation and infection chains, and they use special tools like downloaders or droppers, mainly in PowerShell and Visual-based script, with obfuscation at multiple levels. With these artifacts, they can download, run, hide this malicious stuff on the computer victims. They make their code hard to understand with obfuscation at multiple levels. And later, what do they want to do? Try to persist into the computer victim. And for this, they do this using tricks like a scheduled task or the startup folder in the operating system. Adding the use of a Windows register key, in this case, is commonly used for executing command directly or executing components directly in memory, writing that for persistent. The way that the bad guys use stay in touch with computers depend on the rat that they used. But the technique most frequently used for these activities is dynamic DNS services. They like services that like DAG DNS or no IP for this objective. And for in the last part of the framework about the objectives, this time is very easy to understand what is the main objective. Like the threat actors use rats, is pretty clear that they want to steal personal and money-related information. This information is then sold to commit frauds. In fact, this type of malicious campaigns have become frequent in the investigations and the news of the prosecutors in different countries in the region. Although we were able to find these patterns, every rule had its exception.
Had its exception, yeah, that's true. And there are some cases in which the malicious activity that we discovered in LATAM, it's different from the things that we normally see. Or in some cases, they have details that they are different enough to indicate a potential change in the future or not. What I'm trying to say here, well, let's have a look at the first exception, Operation Hakana. This operation happened in the first half of this year, and it has differences for all the things that we have said so far. First of all, instead of attacking different governments, it's one government, and also located in the country of Guyana. Guyana is located between Venezuela and French Guyana. It's a country that we don't normally see too much activity or this type of operations that we have seen so far. So in that case, it's different. The initial access was similar, yes, that's true, but this initial access was especially crafted based on a geopolitical situation. They weren't trying to impersonate an entity from the country. And also, we have seen different execution of different commands in the victims network. So they will try to make a lateral movement across the victims network. We haven't discussed about that so far. And also, we discovered during this operation the use of undocumented malware that we have called DNODAS rat, written in C++. But not only that, we also have discovered during this operation the existence of core plug or plug X, which is malware used by different China Linet threat actors. So we might think that this operation was conducted by one of those groups. Because of all this, we think this is more like a cyberespionage operation instead of financially motivated like the ones previously mentioned before. Another exception is the new generation of bankers, with a question mark at the end. And that's because from 2021 to this year, we have seen two different Trojan bankers for Windows, and which one of them is Janelero, and the other one is called spybanker.fm, and which they have the particularity that they were developed using the .NET framework. Now, .NET, the use of .NET is not new for malware, that's true, but there is an entire series of different blog posts created by ESET Research talking about Trojan bankers, especially from Brazil, which they can be Mecotio, Casvaneiro, Amavaldo, just to name a few, and they all have been written in Delphi. So that is a main difference, and with that difference, one may think, okay, we have these two at least documented by ESET, right? And this may be saying maybe a new operators are appearing in the scene, or maybe an operator from one banker is moving to create its own malware. And it's not that, we don't know that for sure, but I think it's worth to be mentioned. And like everything has a beginning, has its conclusions. So, with all that we have been presented here, the first thing we wanted to say is, looks like the cybercriminals in Latin America are often obtain a financial profit from the operations. And yes, it's true that most of the malwares used have features or capabilities to spy on the victim. And it looks like in most of these operations, given the amount of victims in different sectors, in some cases can be home users, or also the amount of infections, we think that gives us the clue that maybe the cybercriminals are trying to steal information, sell it maybe in an underground forum, or maybe use it for another campaign. Changing their techniques. Well, we had seen the cybercriminals in Latin America. Yes, they maybe start with one programming language, and then came another operation from another group using another language, or maybe they were changing the phishing emails, making more convincing. and changing, I don't know, the evasion techniques, compile models with benign code. They are changing, trying to understand, okay, what is working, what doesn't work for them. And
the third, more than one group. When we talk about cyber threats from Latin America, is probably thinking in famous group like Blind Eagle, for example. But the different campaigns and their specific targets in each country suggests that there could be several groups operating within the region. As with banking Trojans, this type of attacks could soon to appear in other countries outside of Latin America. Finally, we think that the Latin America region needs to keep improving their cybersecurity defenses, saying this type of malicious activities is not only going to continue through the time, but also it can increase in sophistication. Thank you.